live from the La Palm Royal Beach Hotel at the Equator Bar, and we're discussing education over whiskey.
Just a footnote though,
okay.
A footnote, that once secondary education becomes part of basic education, BEC ceases to exist, which is a very critical...
Because you don't have that terminal...
You don't have to do that. We'll have what we call promotional exams, which is more flexible. BEC, as I said, it destroyed the futures, because children have different stages of development. And I always say that if Einstein, one of the brightest brains of the 20th century, had been a Ghanaian child, he would have failed BEC, because he developed much later.
Right.
And the BEC was simply weeding out kids indiscriminately. And there's a document, I'll look for it later on and show you a deliberate policy decision to actually restrict the passing rate, to restrict it to 60%. So deliberately we're weeding out. This thing is massive. I mean, if we manage to pull it off, first of all, there's going to be a structural upward shift in productivity. That means incomes are going to rise. We're going to be competitive. And then, of course, we have a much bigger pool.
So it's an enabler.
Enabler, catalytic initiative.
Yeah. So, Patrick, and by the way, I like that soundbite. If others have put people on the moon, the least we can do is put every Ghanaian child in the classroom. Patrick, even you would agree with that?
Oh, no, I would agree, Kwaku. Why would I disagree to that?
But okay. So what about the point that Nee makes that the more affluent in society obviously contribute more in taxes to the pool.
To the revenue basket. Yeah.
So they've paid their bit according to their strength, according to their means. So you cannot, restrict free education only to a certain. You cannot use you cannot use incomes, even assuming you could actually empirically establish how much everybody is paying in taxes, and we don't. That everybody really is entitled to it, and that the Constitution doesn't discriminate. It doesn't say free education for those earning below 500 Ghana cedis a month.
No, I think we have combined a couple of things, which I think we should try to unpack. There's no call which suggests that restrict provision of that service to the guy who's private and can pay. That's not a call. You have X billion Ghana cedis that you need to use to dispense the service. As we speak today, there's 300,000 children who are supposed to be in the primary educational institutions and aren't. They're just not in school, right? But that's a system that has been deployed since '96, free compulsory basic education. And so clearly, if we have the means to further expand access and provide further facilities for them, I mean, why will anybody disagree to that? And so it's important to separate the two. We are not suggesting that necessarily restrict somebody. That's one. Two, when we again suggest that the income tax that is paid by the wealthy, I mean, you have a progressive tax system. Typically, they will pay more. But again, if I start looking at other forms of taxes that we have, that in my view, I mean, going forward, if this government really is committed to doing this, one of the ways they can raise substantial revenue, look at property rates, for example. They can raise billions and billions of cedis out of that stuff.
So you are saying that there are ways to raise money?
Absolutely. And if you're going to raise that, it equally has to be balanced against the other social needs that the country is confronted with. I mean, one of the arguments we've been
such as what?
You have
bonuses for the Black Stars.
Oh, exactly.
Well, typically that's one of those. Okay, you have bonuses that are going there. If you look at the Auditor General's report, consistently we have lots of leakage. But the problem with that sort of assumption is that you cannot model any policy prescription against the possible clawbacks that you can get from corruption. I don't see how you can do that concretely. Yes, we can make assumptions and say, for example, that because of inefficient public financial management, we lose X billion. But having said that, we're assuming a certain ideal environment where it will be possible to pluck every single leakage And I think that's why the current government is even struggling to give us, the sound financial plan behind it.
People say, when say in response to this argument, and especially not even when it's coming from you, but from politicians, that when it's time to increase their salaries and backdate it by 4 years, there's no question.
There's no debate, absolutely.
Whether or not the money can be found, whether it's feasible, whether we are, the money is there or not.
Right.
The money is found, right? And so the argument that, those like me, Thompson, and I must confess that my bias is
towards that argument.
Is towards that. Yeah. So let me be upfront about
Just upfront about it.
That's
fine.
That's
That's on your heart.
Yeah. That why should the education of young people today be sacrificed? Well, it's not like they are not growing, they are frozen, and they'll wait until, or they can wait until we tidy up.
Exactly.
And we find all the ways in which we can unlock all these, missing billions. Yeah, continuously missing billions. And then we can release them.
Yes.
And they can now go to school.
Yes. By which time they will be in
By
their
which time-
80s.
By which time they will take up arms.
If we're lucky and they are in their 80s and they are not strong enough to rebel, to create a rebellion, then we're lucky. But if they are in their mid-30s or their 40s, then we could be in trouble. Yeah?
Right. So this is how to look at it. So you go back to the size of the government revenue that we have today.
So sorry about the imbalance on the
No,
on the panel.
that's fine. I mean, I think that.
But I'll help you.
Sure thing. I think that to the
But
extent that we agree.
I don't think you need it though. You'll be fine. You're Patrick Stephenson.
There are structural issues that we need to look at also. First of all, the economy has not been growing the way it should. If we have good fiscal policy, good sectoral policies or microeconomic policies, not macro, but microeconomic policies, the economy should be able to grow enough, as I said, for us to even reduce the tax revenue GDP ratio to, it's similar to 5/10 and 50/100. They both give you 50%, but one gives you more in absolute terms, gives you 50. So you can, once you get 50/100, you can even reduce the percentage from 50 to 40, and you still get more, 40 versus the 5. So the focus, and we put all these things out, including what we call an accelerated program for the rehabilitation, rationalization, and expansion of education infrastructure. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's one of the proposals that we're actually going to be making for the long-term plan that we're working on, because education is such an overarching necessity for development. But let me also add that besides basic, we're looking at all the levels, pre-tertiary, as you said, up to secondary school, and then the middle ground of technical education, some of which are sometimes secondary, sometimes tertiary.
And that is so critical.
Critical. In fact, one of the statistics we're working with is that there are 359 technical vocational institutes throughout the country, private, mission-supported, and government, and only 7 of them are actually ranked as well-equipped out of 359. And I was just discussing that with someone today, actually, in the Bree Hills, and we already have proposals for how to rehabilitate them. And the lady was telling me that it's not that in the past we didn't rehabilitate or equip them, but people were simply stealing the equipment from the facilities and whatnot. She gave me an example of teachers from some of these schools just basically lifting boxes, on open boxes. So then it goes back to something someone said when we're doing the consultations, and it has stuck with me since then. He said, we cannot fight corruption without ethics. So the issue of ethics and values themselves. How is it that government spends so much money to equip technical institutions, and then the very teachers, most of whom I'm sure pray before they even start work, then steal them? Or you go to the hospitals, government buys expensive equipment. Somebody doesn't want it to work because why? Right across the street, they have their own equipment. So they will disable the machine. Right now. So the problem exists on so many levels. It's not just government per se, but the individual and the willingness for change. So ultimately then, this is not, I'm glad that you agree that free education. I know that there's been, Franklin has been saying what free constitutes.
You're referring to Franklin Kujo Vimani, who's
but free in the sense that the person accessing the facility It's not paying for it. Ultimately, someone needs to pay for it. Society, of course, pays for it. Yeah, so we agree on that.
But Patrick raises the question. I'll come to messages in just a second. So, but I'll just raise this, give it a chew over it while I'm reading the messages. That I mean, what perhaps you and myself, people like us, are saying is the ideal situation where yes, it may be wishful that there isn't corruption, that hidden monies are found, and those who've stolen money are punished, and money is retrieved. And in that beautiful world, what we're saying is possible and easy to pay for. But it's not. We're not in an ideal world. There's lots of
we can never be in an ideal world.
Right. There are lots of leakages, and there will always be leakages. So the reality is that the cost. So now then we're compelled to do the accounting, which you've been trying to avoid. That there's not about accounting. It's about lives, people's lives. But there's accounting. Yeah. So let me come to what others are saying on Facebook, where we're streaming live. And Obed Atuboating is watching us live from Cantonment. Thanks for watching, Obed, but you don't have a comment. Maybe you're just enjoying this and learning a thing or two. Apena, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but Amy Atebi says free education is not possible unless we sacrifice as a nation to tax each and every one. Sent this by Facebook. This one is also by Facebook. It says, her name is Mamia, but it says exactly, even here in America, it's not all free. Those with higher incomes pay in public schools. So I think it should be that way with a small country like ours under the influence of the IMF. We need to look at this again. I think he's leaning towards Patrick Stephenson. Bismarck Apia says, so do guys think Nana Akufo-Addo can't do it? If you were in the country when President Kufuor talked about NHIS, some people didn't believe it, but in the end, he succeeded. So in this world, nothing is impossible. A.K. Amenshia says, where basic education is free and compulsory, those who cannot afford it, they are entitled to free feeding, transport, uniform, and others are provided by the government once they can prove that they are unemployed or cannot afford it, that they are entitled to the benefits. And then Jerry from Edum says, to ask the guests, where should the money be coming from? I think we've touched on that a little bit.
I'll provide a few more anecdotes to that.
So
let me add a few pointers to the question you threw to Doc. I mean, I agree, that when we grow the economy and focus on what we do at the micro level and make sure businesses grow and we have a sound tax regime, we can raise the sufficient revenues we need to pursue development, hoping that the possible leakages that we typically get in the public financial management system are not going to be there, right? But if you have to focus specifically on this particular government and the proposition we have before us, what we have as revenue to do this, the possible claims on the revenue, and whether or not we have the space, because I believe the conversation we're having a very ideal situation conversation. The conversation is in a certain context for the current government, revenue, expenditure patterns, whether or not we can make commitments. There are suggestions that we can cut some of the government lines off. Fair enough. I mean, if you take some of the programs that have leaked consistently, you've seen programs like some of these Mass Lock and Leap and other programs. They're all social intervention programs that are supposed to assist the people below the income ladder one way or the other.
Many of whom are poorly educated.
Absolutely. And so if you can look at these programs, reevaluate them, and by way of priority, identify that, look, getting the children in the classroom is a better option than doing cash handouts that people just consume, and you don't see any sustainable, trajectory on that. Then it will make sense, for example, to say, okay, we'll collapse these programs and invest the funds here and make sure the kids are in school and block the leakages. It will work. It's a possible way. It's a possible you could claw back some revenue. I talked about people not paying different types of taxes because we cannot identify people, and so I mean, they make
with
propositions
national
about
identification and increasing migration of people from the informal to formal
sector.
Formal sector, the widening of the payments, mobile and
payment systems
electronic
that you
payment
need to have
system,
that. Yes.
which a lot of regular people, carpenters and plumbers are using. They're registered and using it.
Absolutely.
So monies that were hidden under beds and mats are now
Somehow they are coming back into the system.
absolutely, they're getting captured.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So if we can move beyond the current rhetoric of, let's broaden the tax net, and you don't see credible strategies that, follow them, it becomes very difficult. One way that I believe we can look at this, for example, I mean, in the spirit of the conversation we're having around free senior high school, we know from reports that even under the current system where budget allocations are made and disbursements, are made to the various schools to support their activities, there's a huge leakage, bad management practices, right? Is it possible, for example, to say that all the students in the country that will want to enroll in the senior high school under the current regime, given the propositions that we have, is it possible to suggest, for example, that we will identify all of them biometrically, okay? Because we are going to do that anyway. And instead of the typical cash handouts that you have seen, or the disbursements you have seen, the money rather follows the students. And so we know that it costs X to provide you food, it costs Y to provide you exercise books. We upload the cash onto the cards. We can collect further data about the parents and guardians of these people on top of that. I mean, there are various ways to look at this. It could possibly cut out the leakages that you have in the system. It could further provide sufficient revenue for investing in other areas. I mean, there are various ways of looking at this. If, first of all, we recognize that we are cash strapped, we need to do this and we need commitment. Some of the lines on government budget, for instance, we agree have to be cut. What does the political economy look like?
Should we touch the Heritage Fund?
I'll get to that. I'll answer that question. But let me clarify a few things here in terms of an ideal situation. You can be idealistic and also be realistic at the same time. So ideal is something you aspire to, you never really attain. But realistic means that you actually have your feet on the ground. I don't think anybody anywhere would expect to completely remove waste from public spending. The best you can do is to minimize it. You talk about mass slug, it's not really my favorite vehicle. It's more like a social intervention. But don't forget there are also people who actually benefit from it. Absolutely. So if you move the money from there, you are also depriving them. So we need to look at those issues also. And then thirdly, there's a very fundamental structural problems. Most of the work we do at the Commission has to do with looking at our problems from a structuralist point of view, because they are what we experience are more like symptoms of a bigger problem. And one of the biggest structural problems that we actually want to be addressed by this government and subsequent ones is a very low savings rate for Ghana. It's very, very low. We've looked at Ghana and 3 other countries, I think Malaysia, China, South Korea, and then Ghana. And you just clearly there's a problem. I think ours is 17.3, which is the highest, and it's lower than the lowest of all of it. So we need to tackle that. And that the national savings rate is not just the money you and I have in the bank. That's one aspect, but also the government's deficit, how big, or maybe even a surplus, and then business profits, corporate profits. These things come together, and that's why I kept saying that if we grow the economy, that would be one way of doing that. In that case, we will be expanding the tax base, not necessarily casting the net, because the economy, between 80 and 90% of the labor force are in the informal sector. And the bulk of them are actually earning so little anyway. If you capture all the data on them, they probably wouldn't qualify to pay any taxes anyway. And if we have a really equitable system, we may actually give them money for survival. So I wouldn't put too much faith in that. Now the issue of the
premium. Sorry, the
Heritage Fund. Right now we don't know what is going on, but we can discuss it generally. If we should use it,
irrespective of what
irrespective of what is going on, it's not really. My view, in fact, is that the entire money from oil, both the Heritage Fund and what they call the ABFA, the annual budget funding amount, which goes into the budget for recurrent expenditure. It's meant nominally for infrastructure based on a long-term plan according to the law. but in the absence of a long-term plan, it's supposed to be. We should actually shift them. We should amend the law and shift all the oil money into infrastructure, fiscal, hard infrastructure funding, so that doesn't come into the budget, because it creates these spikes, or what we call fiscal illusion. So this year you have a surge of oil money. The next year it goes down. 2011, 2012, zero oil tax revenue. 2013, 2014, it shoots up and comes down. So you don't want to finance a budget, and we need to start planning as if we had no oil. Because frankly, after we discovered oil, we should have managed public expectations. We didn't. So everyone thought Ghana was the next Saudi Arabia. Believe it or not, Saudi Arabia produces in just 1 week, I think 4 or 5 days, what we produce in an entire year. So we are nowhere near this. So there's not that much there. That's one. Two, if we're to touch that money, it shouldn't go into current consumption or recurring expenditure. That means you don't use it for salaries, you don't use it to buy a Land Cruiser, you don't use it for anything. It should be leveraged. You don't want to use it directly. It's only 200 plus million, not a whole lot of money. But you can leverage that money to raise maybe 2-3 billion US dollars, if that's what you want. Given the certainty that a certain flow of income from the base investment will be available to do what? Finance the money that you want. So, and this is something that's been missing in budgeting in Ghana. Leveraging, you see, there are two ways of financing development, especially infrastructure, that we've missed. We used to practice it in a very loose way up to 1999, then we abandoned that. But in the plan, we're actually recommending its revival and improvement. We have something we call pay as you go. So you get your revenue, you want to build schools, you then spend the money for how much you can spend, and then you leave it there. You get more money, you spend. So as you travel around the country, you see so many unfinished. My own favorite primary school in Aguna Street, Methodist Primary School, I went there not long ago. There was a building that was actually started when they started the 1987 JSS reforms that was meant to be for workshop.
Okay.
It's been under construction since 1987. That's because we are using pay as you go. Now, in infrastructure provision, you have what we call intergenerational financing. And the rationale there is that if you put up a school, the benefit spreads across generations, and therefore the cost must also spread. So you borrow upfront to build a school, and then you service the cost of that thing there for at least 30 years. Exactly. That's what we can do if we're to touch the Heritage Fund, not to spend the money literally, but leverage that to raise funds, because there's such a backlog of infrastructure. I was just at a speech and prize giving day of one of the high schools, and they also pointed to the assembly hall that's been under construction for 10 years. And you have stories like that, all because we are not leveraging, all because we are not being creative in the way we finance infrastructure. Pay as you go is a no-no for us.
Patrick, what do you think? Or should we simplify it, boil it all down to, as a parent, if you've got money in the bank, your kid can't go to school, do you keep the money in the bank or do you use it?
Well, no, I mean, it's one of the arguments that we have equally shared, because the numbers that we heard when they started talking about, this free senior high school a couple of weeks ago, we had something in the region of 820 million, I'm not too sure.
I kept seeing dollars and I was wondering why, because we don't budget in dollars. So
it's something in the region of $820 million. But if you do some rough computations, probably you'll be coming to that number. How much do you have in the Heritage Fund? Something that is a little below $300 million. So if you look at the components of the budget, for instance, that goes to the educational sector. I mean, the major pipelines, you're going to find assets, goods and services, you're going to find salaries and compensation. Strangely enough, compensation we know usually takes up a lot of what goes in there, right? So if that analogy is anything to go by, you take $300 million, given the logic we have currently, which is not going to change, you have a problem. It doesn't finance the entire budget, it goes away. So I agree when it says that you have to find innovative ways by which you can either leverage, etc. But it all comes back to the foundational conversation. Are you raising sufficient taxes? Or is the government finding innovative borrowing strategies to finance development? This is what it primarily comes to. And even
or are you prioritizing right?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, you would have to equally use that as an underlying indicator to determine which of the strategies will make sense. And so if you don't have sufficient clarity about which of these methods is going to be used. And you just get a blanket, let's dip our hands into this. It's very worrying. Of course, for a country like ours as well, that at least in the last 4 or 5 years, anytime we have gone to the capital markets to raise, any of these securities that we have issued under the pretense that is for infrastructure development, we are being charged rates that are horribly in excess of what we're probably even earning on the heritage funds, for example. The economics just doesn't add up, right? So somebody would argue that why do you want to do that? In our jurisdictions, it's worked. People have decided to invest, in infrastructure, invest in things like education and healthcare to protect interest today and then leverage the possible gains that you can get over time. What is the behavior of our government here under the current dispensation, and to what extent does that provide comfort for somebody like me who just watches what the public policymaker does? I don't have that level of comfort, because there's a likelihood that 300 million, we're assuming in a very ideal case that all of it is going to go into the system that we know for disbursing money for development, and somehow things are going to get done. What if it leaks out? Because some studies even are suggesting that on every city there's a possibility 38 pesos is lost when we have to mobilize revenue from downstream, upstream before we use them for development processes. So it's a very dicey situation. Should you tell the government not to touch it? That would be the ideal thing. Can they guarantee that when they touch it, they are going to use innovative means, some of which Doc has provided, that ensure we get substantial value from it? I don't think I have that level of comfort given the current dispensation that we have. So better stay away from it. Let's find.
No, we can be risk averse.
Okay, let me just do this, and then I'll come around for final comments, so we can wrap up. So it's a good moment to take to toast to authentic whiskey. Let's toast to Johnny Walker, the original taste of whiskey. Since 1820, Johnny Walker has remained the world's #1 Scotch whiskey and has won numerous awards for excellence. This is because the impeccable formula of distillation has been jealously guarded over the ages, thus its distinctive taste. Johnny Walker comes from an intricate blend of a wide spectrum of carefully selected flavors, giving it that unique taste savored by millions all over the world. So let's toast to the unquestionable taste of whiskey. Johnny Walker, the whiskey the world knows best. Johnny Walker, keep walking. Drink responsibly, not for sale to persons under 18 years and pregnant women. And we're in the final minutes of our conversation from the Equator Bar at La Palm Royal Beach Hotel on the lounge on Star 103.5 FM with Dr. Nimoy Thompson and Patrick Stephenson, and education and how we pay for it for everyone, every child. Here onwards is the conversation. We've got just about 2 minutes.
I don't think the risk of abuse should really prevent us from acting. All it does is that it should rather inspire us to put safeguards in place to make sure that if the money is touched, it's actually leveraged. You don't want to use, not just that, but there are so many funds out there that are just sitting there that can be leveraged for rapid infrastructure development. So that's my view. I don't think it should be spent on current expenditure, either that or any other fund, but rather use that to leverage and provide the necessary infrastructure, both the hard infrastructure and also the soft infrastructure in terms of teachers, materials, books, textbooks, and so forth and so on. It's a complete thing. But I find it ironic that a country that believed so much in football that we actually flew money over hills and valleys and oceans to the black
in a specially leased plane.
Exactly. Is actually having a debate as to whether or not we should pay for education. If you believe in it enough, you always find a way. Just as we believed so much in the Black Stars, we found a way, because we knew if we didn't do that, the sky was literally going to collapse on us. We should take
the sky didn't collapse
it didn't.
on us.
So we should take the same position on education, that without that, 4 out of every 5 youth have only BEC or less. Just think about it. 80%. We're not going anywhere.
And that our own individual security is at stake.
Very much.
Irrespective of how high your fence wall is.
Or the electric, and you still sleep with one eye open.
Right.
My final words. I mean, listening to Dr. Thompson, it will appear that we would want to, if you like, compel the behavior of our politicians or people that formulate and implement policy, either by expecting them to live by certain moral codes where they will reason right, like those of us who are the citizens, and do things right. Well, that moral bar is too high. if we have to look at the performance of our public sector over time. It's too high to hold them back. Can you compel them with
But
loss?
mustn't we hold them back?
Well, we should, but then that's the ideal case again, right? Then you have the other situation where you compel them to behave by laws, for example. So you institute laws that says, because this is education, it must take priority over everything else that you, for example, have in your budget. Is it possible to do that? I don't know what the dynamics could look like, but you can do that. But even that in itself may set the laws, again, the behavior too low. So it is through conversations like this, for starters, and our ability to recognize that we must continually push them to do what is right. And so I particularly was excited when I heard this morning that the finance minister suggested that, you know what, we haven't talked about that, we haven't discussed that, we're not going there. But we're still looking for innovative ways to get the stuff done.
Okay.
Getting the stuff that we all agree must be done.
So
how do you do it?
All right, so a yes or no as much as possible. When schools reopen this year for the academic year in September, should every child who's not in school show up and expect to have education and food and books and a
I'm not
teacher?
sure that's how it's framed. There are two different categories now. People who are already in school and probably going to school already, and then those who should be in school but are not. That's about 2.8 million. That's a separate treatment. You mentioned the 300,000 for primary.
That's
It's actually
primary.
come down from 600,000 in 2010 to 300,000.
300,000.
But for JHS, it's actually gone up from 800 to about 900,000. For SHS, it's much. The total is about 2.8 million. That will require separate treatment. I think the government's proposal covers those who are already in the system.
Okay.
Yes, I think they should do that.
And Patrick, is it a yes?
Should
For those
they-
who are
should they
already
have-
in the pipe, for those who are already in the school.
Well, for those who are already in school, typically you'd expect that these things are going to be provided. Given that the government is going to be able to support them, you don't want a case where 3-4 quarters down the line, allocations don't go to them. The teachers have to now struggle to find.
So you believe the
these
government is
levels.
going to do it? But
When
do
I
you
look
think-
at the space they have in the fiscal basket and the possibility of prioritizing this, shifting this all the way to the top, like we expect, I doubt it is going to take precedence. I could be wrong. March 2nd will tell.
Okay, watch this space. I suppose is is appropriate at this point. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Ini, and thank you for joining us on the lounge. My name is Kwaku. Have a wonderful evening and a great weekend. Goodbye.